Let's just make everything brass. What's going on, everybody? This is my 2021 Traxxas Ford Bronco, and we all know that there is an obsession with people adding brass to their vehicles. The TRX4 seems to be the one that has more brass option parts than any other scale RC truck. So I'm thinking, let's buy all of it and see how heavy we can make this truck. Now, some parts we're not going to be able to find in brass, but those parts, I'm going to try and find some sort of metal upgrade that is as heavy as reasonably possible or available. Now, I'm sure there will be situations where I found a part that may not be the absolute heaviest option, but I'm going to do my best to try and do that. Now, also, I am going to make some compromises because I don't want the outward appearance of this truck to scream exactly what it is. Seeing brass parts on an axle, not uncommon for a TRX4. So I don't think that seeing brass parts underneath is gonna be that big of a deal. But I'm not gonna add wheel widener after wheel widener after wheel widener made out of brass just to try and add the weight. That way I can just inconspicuously park it somewhere at an event that's kind of in the way and make somebody go down to move it and then realize that this thing may weigh 3 or 4 times the stock or expected weight of one of these vehicles. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I have been collecting all of the parts for this project. This is the first round of parts for this. These are most of the parts that I ran across to just replace the initial common bolt-ons. In addition to all those parts, I also went and picked up a scale. Now, I had to pick up a scale that was capable of higher ranges than what most of the scales that I had here are. So this will do up to 70 pounds, and I'm confident that that's going to do just fine. In stock form, this truck weighs just over 7 pounds without a battery, which is already heavy, but we are going to add a significant amount more today. I'm going to install all these parts at this time, and we're going to go through it. I'm going to quickly run you through the parts that I purchased, and then I'm going to get them put on, and we're going to circle back around and I'll show you exactly what we've got going on. First, let's start with the axles. I purchased a kit of just all of the typical axle components, being the backside of the knuckle, the C-hub, and the outer portal box for the front, as well as a set of brass hexes that are included. Now, as I mentioned, there's a set of brass outer portal box covers on there. However, I also picked up a different set of brass outer portal box covers, and these have additional bolt-on rings. My goal is that I'm going to be able to take these and modify them to be able to fit the brass inner knuckle that was included with this kit to add as much weight as possible. I'll link below to all of the parts that I'm buying. Now, I don't suggest this project in the first place. This isn't something that I would ever actually do for performance. I'm doing it just for the sake of trying to make the heaviest TRX4 we possibly can. I also picked up a pair of brass diff covers, a pair of brass diff housings that actually holds the spider gears and mounts to the ring gear, some brass painted link mounts. I got a pair of these modular brass rear portal weights. However, I'm not sure that I got the appropriate hanger for the rear, so some of these parts may have to wait until we get to the second phase of this. And then I also picked up TRX4 metal axle housings. Now, this is not brass, and it doesn't even say that it's aluminum, and it definitely doesn't feel aluminum. These are some sort of like cast pot and metal. They're not super high quality. The bearing tolerance pockets, not that great, or even maybe that concentric, but they're heavy. Definitely heavier than aluminum would be, but not brass. Again, they're just called metal. Then I picked up a set of brass drive shafts. Super heavy, maybe one of the worst idea parts out of all of them. I picked up a set of brass lower spring cups for the shocks. I even picked up a set of brass pivot balls. This will replace all of the pivot balls in the vehicle, and I believe that I actually bought 2 sets of the shock ones, which aren't really needed. I think this set will do everything that I needed. Then I bought front and rear brass chassis braces. Adding weight up onto the chassis on purpose, not something I would necessarily ever recommend, but here's 2 more bad ideas. then I was running out of brass options to actually go onto the chassis. So I had to move towards some aluminum options. I picked up some front and rear shock towers. This will also replace the panhard mount. I picked up an all aluminum motor plate setup, an aluminum skid plate because why not? And then while looking for an aluminum transmission case, I ran across an all metal transmission assembly. This also came with a steel spur gear, which I didn't know, and I purchased one separately, but this one should have everything we need. It's got all metal gears inside. Who knows if this is even any stronger than the factory transmission, but it's heavier, so I got it. Then we moved to the wheels and tires. For the wheels, I'm going with a set of Vanquish Products Method 105 wheels. These are 1 inch wide rather than the normal 0.8 inch wide, so a little bit wider, a little bit more mass. But then on top of that, we're going to replace the clamp rings with 1 inch wide brass inner clamp rings to add a nice amount of weight. We're going to add stainless steel brake rotor weights to the wheels, and we're going to mount the wheels to the vehicle with a set of brass hubs. And I'm going to use some of the IBTR beadlock rings because they have a little bit smaller internal diameter, which means a little bit more weight, and it looks good. For the tires, we're going to be using the Proline Crawler. This is the BFG, this is the G8 compound. It's kind of my preferred tire. So this is the one that we're going to be going with. Now, stock Proline foams do not hold up to weight very well. They really don't hold up to even lightweight trucks very well. So we need to replace that. But specifically, to be able to hold the weight of what I assume that this thing is going to be in the end, I grabbed some Crawler Innovations single stage heavyweight foams. Now the foam themselves aren't heavy. The name is actually more talking about the foam density. So these foams are a solid closed cell. They're going to support heavy weights much better. And the tires won't really look all that different than a normal tire when it's sitting here. So one more piece to the puzzle. So that's the parts list that we have at this point. Now I'm gonna tear this truck down and start replacing all of those items. And after a couple of days of work, the truck is wrapped up. Now, I say a couple of days because I did have to take a few extra steps beyond just a simple bolt-on. The big reason is that we've got so many different aftermarket parts here and they don't always work together super well. The Traxxas parts are all very consistent. You can count on a replacement part fitting just like the first one did. But when you start looking at all these manufacturers and their slight differences in tolerances from one part to the next, you start adding up all of those tolerance issues and you run into a number of clearance issues. And that was definitely the case with this. I ran into part issues trying to fit the Hot Racing outer portal cover to the Yeah Racing inner portal knuckle. And that was kind of expected because the Yeah Racing set has its own cover that it comes with, but I was obviously trying to add a heavier version of the Hot Racing to it. So I expected that. I had to mill a little bit of material off of the inside of that outer portal cover to get that to bolt on. The transmission, motor plate, skid plate combo, that is where a ton of my other issues popped up, just with spur gears being pushed too far forward and interfering with the aluminum motor plate. I had to remove a bunch of material from the aluminum motor plate to make it clear the steel spur gear that was attached to that aftermarket transmission set that I got. And I put an aluminum skid plate in it, and that was also just having the holes in slightly different locations. It was just one thing stacking on top of the other to really cause quite a headache in the transmission area. Then I also purchased some parts that weren't actually compatible with this truck. Maybe some of you caught that early in the video, such as the shock towers and panhard. Well, this truck has the molded inner fenders, which integrate that stuff into it. So removing those inner fenders to put on the metal shock towers and things like that that I bought would have actually been less weight. So we're going to keep these large molded inner fenders, and I think that they look better anyway. So I've got some extra parts there that I'm not going to use. Then we get into the bumper mount. Now I bought front and rear bumper mounts made from brass. However, the new Traxxas Bronco body, the bumper mount is basically integrated into one part. It doesn't use a chassis brace with pegs that slide in anymore, but I still wanted to use that cross brace as it added a good amount of weight. So I actually jumped into Fusion 360 and designed up an adapter piece so that I could bolt on the outer bumper skin to that brass cross brace. That is definitely not something that I would normally have ever planned on doing. I 3D printed the mount, but to make sure that it was strong enough, I also used some 3/16 stainless rod that sleeves the mount so that where it goes into that bumper mount is just not relying on 3D printing. 3D printing, not that strong, not something I would use in structural situations most of the time, especially if you've got a bunch of weight behind it. But now I've got something that has metal in the inside to help transfer the forces of a very heavy truck hitting that new front bumper mount. As for the rear bumper though, that one I have not conquered yet. I'll get to that here in the future likely. I'll have to figure out what I would do. That's not a situation that I'm going to be able to easily just unbolt the previous mount and then make a new one. I'm gonna have to actually cut the bumper and make some adapters to be able to use that brass rear chassis brace. I went over the parts list of the wheels and tires and all that. I don't know if I mentioned for sure, but I did the same treatment on the spare to make sure that we add as much weight as possible. Like I said, I ordered some parts that weren't compatible with this, but I also forgot to order some parts as well, specifically on the rear axle. Now, you'll see in the back that I do have brass outer portal box covers. Those were the original portal box covers that came with that front brass setup. So those work back here, but they're not the heaviest option. So I probably need to replace those. I also need to purchase the inner portal cover and the portal hanger that goes on the actual axle itself. I'm really missing some opportunities there to add some more weight. I went out and drove this truck prior to installing the new foams in these tires, and it was a nightmare. The foams that come in the Proline tires would not support the weight of this. As soon as I would turn, the tire would roll completely under and start to snag on parts of the bumper and sliders. So I installed those Crawler Innovations single stage closed cell foams, and now you can't even tell what this truck weighs. But speaking of that, on to the tally of the first stage of this build. Now, this truck started at just over 7 pounds, and now we're at 13 pounds, 3 ounces. There is no other reason than what exactly I'm doing here that I can ever imagine having a truck like this that would weigh this much. Absolutely ridiculous, but we're only just getting started. As I already mentioned, I'm missing some opportunities for parts here. There's some other places on this truck that I can find some marginal gains in weight as well. And then from there, we're probably gonna have to get into the more outrageous things where we can start adding weight to the interior of this, where it still won't be visible. This truck will still look fairly stock from the outside, but we'll really start packing on the pounds. If you guys know of option parts that I'm missing to add some more weight, absolutely drop them in the comments below. Or if you have some outside the box ideas of adding weight, let me know those as well. As I mentioned, I am going to compromise on some areas of weight to keep this thing actually functional, not looking completely hack. As I mentioned, I am going to make some compromises on this as I don't want it to look super hack, and I think that it should still function. But speaking of function, right now I do have that stock Titan motor and the stock Traxxas servo. Obviously, those things probably aren't going to cut it for the long run. I'm thinking to add as much weight as possible, we should add in a great big low kV brushless motor and like a 5th scale servo, just because we need the power and it will obviously be heavier. Drop your guess in the comments below what you think the final weight for this truck will be. Drop any of your suggestions in the comments below. Ridiculous projects just spur ridiculous ideas, so let's hear them. As always though, thanks for watching guys. Hit the like button if you enjoyed these, subscribe if you're not already, hit the notification bell so you see the videos as soon as they get uploaded. A heavy metal Bronco will be back soon.